So at this time, it's my joy to introduce to you two of the event planners for our platform, Maja Sundstrom and Angela Chandler. So if you guys will just follow the agenda and go from there, that would be awesome. And I believe
Thank
you're on
you,
first,
Miss.
Maja. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miss Evelyn. And thanks everyone else for joining us today. Again, my name is Maja Sandstrom. I am a part of the ARC events planning team. So it's my pleasure to introduce a guest that we've had several times on the Anti-Racist Conversations group. Angela Chandler is employed by the MITRE Corporation, which is headquartered in McLean, Virginia, and Bedford, Massachusetts, and has hubs across the United States as well as internationally. MITRE is a research and development organization that serves in the public interest and supports U.S. government agencies. At MITRE, Angela is a business and technology strategist who supports healthcare agencies to develop business and communication plans. In addition to her daily duties, she supports the initiatives within the Inclusion and Diversity Division and helped to set up a multicultural employee resource group called MERG. MERG led to the creation of additional networks such as the Latinx Network, Black Community Network, and as well as the Asian and Islander Pacific Network. Angela has led book clubs and seminars on addressing and talking about taboo topics in the workplace that revolve around racism, culture, misogyny, etc. So again, we're so thankful and grateful to have Ms. Angela Chandler here today with us. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks, Maja. All right, thank you all for having me again. I look forward to today's presentation. I hope you all get something out of it as usual. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, as I always have presentations ready so we can talk through them. So I will say, let me go ahead and put this in presentation mode. If I can get some thumbs up that you guys can
Angela,
hear me.
can I introduce you? Angela, can I interrupt just for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think Maja was going to introduce a book club first. So could you introduce her?
Oh, the what? Sorry.
Maja was going to introduce the book club first. Did you do you have her bio?
Sorry. Evelyn. Sorry. I am let me stop sharing screen. Give me one. Bring it up. This is probably what you did earlier. Apologies.
That's
I am
okay.
just jumping in because I was ready to present. I've been rehearsing, if you can't tell, this morning.
That's okay.
Yeah. All right. So apologies. Yeah, I'm ready to go with the presentation. As you can see, I'm really, ready to go. All right. So yes, I'm sorry. Let me return it back to Maja. So Maja is an experienced talent acquisition professional with over 10 years of experience and a dedicated history of over 15 years in volunteering and organizational work. Maja is currently working as a resource manager at a multinational consulting firm. She also leads the Succeeding Here pillar for her community's DEI team, diversity, equity, and inclusion, with a primary focus on promoting and facilitating DEI training and visibility within her KPMG teams. Maja leads the community support online and learning events team at Move On. She's also a member of ARC, which is our Anti-Racist Conversation events and planning team. She lives in Chicago with her home, and she shares it with her senior cat, Charles, and has recently welcomed Domingo into her family.
Thank you so much, Angela. And you know, Miss Evelyn, maybe I should have had a couple of pictures ready to gush over my dog and my cat, but I'll save those for the book club when we have a little bit more time.
Sounds fun.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that introduction. I won't take too long today. I think most of us have been through a book club that I facilitated before, but you can just expect that in June, we will be repurposing one of our, kind of usually our regularly scheduled programs to take a deep dive into The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. So today I'm going to share in the chat a quick reading guide that we can all kind of get started on, and just keep in mind as we are reading this important book. So a little bit of backstory. In The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein dispels the myth that racial segregation in housing is primarily the result of de facto practices, such as individual choices. Instead, Rothstein argues that it is racial segregation in housing is actually the product of systemic practices, specifically government policies and laws at all levels. Through numerous examples, Rothstein illustrates how governmental actions systemically created and enforced residential racial segregation across the United States. As a resident of Chicago, I was drawn to the work that Habitat for Humanity Chicago is doing on this very topic, and have leaned heavily on their book talk series, which is currently ongoing. They're reading The Color of Law as well. So I've provided you some additional resources if you'd like to kind of join them as they are moving through the book. They are, again, currently reading The Color of Law, and they are slated to end their book series in November. So they're about 8 or 9 chapters in, but in our discussion in June, we are going to be covering the whole book. So my guidance to you as readers is to take this reading guide and, keep the questions that we have for every chapter in mind as you're reading. Jot some notes down. This is not a study guide. You're not required to answer every single question, but maybe one question is going to speak to you or in a deeper fashion than others. So just keep these questions in mind, and take some notes as you're reading so we can have a fruitful discussion. It's going to be very packed because I think we're going to set aside about 90 minutes to 2 hours to have this book club. So, take in what you can, but again, this is not a study guide. You're not going to be tested on this. We just want to make sure that we're set up to have a great discussion with brevity in mind. One other thing that I'll note is we're not going to lead this book club with just the knowledge. Recently in Chicago, I was volunteering for an initiative called Bring Chicago Home, which would have provided housing assistance, and especially to those who were housing insecure or unhoused, by simply raising the taxes of those who are living in homes that cost $1 million or more. That initiative did not fail by a whole lot, but it did fail. So we're still kind of at status quo in Chicago. I'm hoping that reading this book and developing ways to support initiatives like this in Chicago and maybe in your hometown, we can start taking action to right the wrongs of the past. So with that, I'm going to put the resource guide in the chat, and then we'll also send it via email. And if anyone has any suggestions as they're reading the book or anything's jumping out to them, you'll also have my email address as well to kind of discuss as you're thinking about it before we dive in June.
Thank you, Maya.
Any initial questions?
Yeah. Take it away. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right. I've also put some hot links to either purchase the book, but just do a quick search. Your local library might have a copy as well. And if you need any assistance in purchasing the book, you can't find it, just let me know. We can work that out and make sure that you have a copy so we can all read along together. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll hand it off to Angela now.
Apologies, everyone. Yes, I just got a call that we have some flooding in one of our rental properties. So I'm sorry if I have to step away. I will try to get through this presentation, but I might have to jump off and take a couple calls. So apologies in advance. All right, life, here we go. Give me one sec. All right, so let's delve into the presentation.
Follow this style so closely like the rest of us, right? This past week, first of all,
I got some background noise from you. Do you want to go on mute? All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about systematic racism. What I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to combine a couple of our previous conversations that I've had and topics that I presented on and bring them around systemic racism in our US laws and legislation. So I'm going to recap DEIA and those definitions. I'm also going to recap intersectionality because that's a topic that impacts all of us and applies to all of us. And it actually can impact how we exist and how our US laws and legislation impacts us as well. All right. So we have some ground rules. I always go through this. Again, this is a learning opportunity and there are no dumb questions. Please actively listen with an open mind. And if you are going to have discussions, actually listen to the person that's talking. Don't listen to reply. I say that all the time. It's such an inherent thing that we do day in and day out. But again, think about what people are saying and think about it really before you reply. Stay on topic. Again, today we're going to be focusing on systematic racism. So let's try to stay within that bubble and not to go too far outside of it. And be curious and be humble, right? So that's the point, is really being curious and understand that we don't know everything. I don't know everything. None of us on this call know everything. All right. So I'm going to go through our recap. For those who are on the call or prior to. These are definitions for diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. So at the top, we have diversity, which includes all the ways in which people are different. And then we have inclusion, which is creating those environments where people can feel included and they don't feel excluded because of one of those intersectionality points, which I'll get to in just a moment. And then equity is everyone having the opportunity to fully participate. And equity is, again, it's done through law. And then access. Access is actually having the door open so everyone can actually be included. So these two areas, actually all of these areas are really impacted by our laws as well. But they haven't always been. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we have diversity, which focuses on primary and secondary characteristics. Again, this is a recap. So primary characteristics are usually the most visible. And so, for example, gender, race, sexual orientation, age, those are the things that you can see and usually people have biases upon seeing you. And then there's other secondary characteristics which are defined by way of experience, right? So this is how you grew up, the education, the income level that you are, socioeconomic status as we refer to, and then communication styles. So these account for really the choices that we make in life as well, and they're also defined by our life experiences. And then bringing a lot of that together, again, recap, I can go into these more, but intersectionality, right? So it's really about how we come together as people. So thinking about our intersectionality, think about where you fit in different areas when it comes to work experience, education, appearance, abilities or lack thereof, age, gender expression, family. So, right, all of these characteristics is what makes us different. It makes us unique, but it also can make certain people targets for a lot of things, including the law, right? So thinking about this, we're going to jump into our first icebreaker, and I just want people to kind of talk about where you are, so your name, location in the US, and what comes to mind when you think of systematic racism. And I'm not going to call on people, so if you don't want to share, that's fine. But I do encourage you to share because we'll actually have another discussion topic at the end.
I think when we're talking about actually racism, but systemic racism, we're judged on our appearances. And what happens is that we're classified according to one aspect of our diversity. And so that kind of subsections our humanity, which is what we share with everybody. And I think that what happens is that we then feed that fallacy of us against them. So I think we have to somehow get rid of that fallacy and realize that it's just us. And that when you take a look at all of those things that were just up on the screen, that diversity is what makes each of us unique, but makes every human beautiful. And if we can then take a look at all of that and not see it as something that we stand against or see as a threat, I think we're going to be well on our way. One more note. My name is not Charles, it's Seth. That's my roommate who I guess must have used my computer, okay? And I can't change it. But anyway, but I think that that's really important, okay? And especially at this time, we have this unique opportunity to put that into a characteristic or into a category where it's skin color, okay? It is where you're from or whatever. But above that is our humanity, and that's going to give us the strength to completely eradicate all of the rest of what is a fallacy.
I'll respond. I'm sorry, go on. Someone else speak. Go on. I think it's John that's speaking now.
I'm sorry about that, Crystal. Glad to meet everybody here. My name is John McFarland. I'm out of New York City. What comes to mind? Oh, my pronouns are he, him. I'm sorry about that. And this is my first time here. I'm glad to be here. I've been a Move On member for quite a few years, and I did attend the summit in 2023 in Atlanta. A great summit. What comes to mind when I think of systematic racism is like top-down discrimination, like federal government and trickle downhill discrimination to like folks that identify like me, especially here in New York State. You know, the agency-born discrimination is rampant. When I say agency, I mean like NYPD, DMV, Social Security, administration of child support. It's baffling how discriminatory they are against folks in my category. And I think at large, that's what I think about when I think about systematic racism. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you both, John and Seth. I'm Evelyn, and I'm located in Illinois, originally from Texas. And what comes to mind when I think of racism actually goes all the way back to Jim Crow. And I say that because that was kind of the era that I'm most familiar with. And then not just Jim Crow, but one aspect of that was education from my experience. And that's when I actually saw the lack of equity, and I saw the not wanting to include someone like Seth said because of the skin color. So that's always like in the forefront of my mind. And as an educator, you know, I did everything within my power to dispel that within my classroom, you know. So yeah, I think that even holds true today when we see everything that's happening in education. It's not against people that are not people of color. It is against people who actually are people of color. That racism, that aspect of racism is still alive and well, unfortunately.
I'll chime in after what Miss Evelyn said. My name is Melissa. I currently am in Phoenix, but I grew up in the Midwest and spent much of my life there. What first pops into my mind when I think of systemic racism is overwhelm, and then I think of education. The overwhelm just simply because there's so much going on in our society that seems to be taking us so far backward that it does become overwhelming to me. And knowing that education is so vitally important in fighting I want to say ignorance, but I don't even know if it's ignorance, because there seems to be like an intentionality of some of the hate that is going on across all levels of diversity. So I guess, that's why I come to these things, to try to figure out what I as one human being can do. And I think education is the key.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm located in Manassas, Virginia. I have heard so many different stories about systemic racism, and that is my area of listening to about systemic racism. It is interesting to hear about what happens to people of color, and not necessarily they all have to be Black or white or whatever, but especially when with the police and the government. Thank you.
Okay, John.
I'm John Cavalunas, and I am from Lakewood, Illinois. Live close by to Evelyn. And a couple things came to my mind right away on systemic racism is the racist attitudes of unions, and how I think that is taking what is a very positive structure in terms of the idea of having unions, and yet you're bringing racism into it where you exclude people of color. So I think that is corrupting something that should be applauded, and it really makes me angry in one sense and disappointed. And then the other area you've mentioned already is education, and thinking of the inner city schools so often not having the resources that others do, and they are poor learning activities where the physical structure is crumbling, not taken care of, etc. So right there, you are discriminating from the very earliest stages in the area of education.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Maja. I'm located in Chicago, and just racial profiling really is kind of what comes up first of mind for me when we talk about racism. There's so many opportunities to racially profile in our society, and in policing, in the judicial system, and we'll be talking even more about in housing in June. So I think that's really what comes up first to mind for me.
Thanks all for sharing. So again, I'll recap. I'll do mine as well. So my name is Angela Chandler. I am just outside of Washington, D.C. in Fairfax, Virginia. And what comes to mind when I think of systemic racism, I really do think about all the systems that we have in place. And I think, hold on, someone say it. I think it was John mentioned about the top down. I'll be addressing a lot of that in today's presentation, but we have a government and a system of rules in place that govern the way we operate as a society. And when biases and thoughts about fear, about racism and something different come into play, it can really impact the people who are making our systems think differently about how it should be used, and really who should be using it and who should not be using it. And if they are going to use it, then what does that mean, right? So I'll get into that a little bit. So that's kind of what I think about when I hear systemic racism. So what I did is I gathered some word clouds from the internet. And so this is what other people think of when they think of systematic racism. So these are some word clouds. So basically, as you do exercises and people put in their data, they create, the word cloud. So I'll give you all a minute just to kind of look over these 6 different ones. And see what other people think of when they hear systematic. And if anything jumps out at you from these, feel free to share.
Bullying jumps out at me.
Yeah, bullying's a good one. Especially when those concepts are integrated into a system who has power.
Hi, it's John again. I'm gonna I noticed that the word cloud, the bottom word cloud in the middle, that's more of a word cloud that expresses, I guess, what anti-racism looks like, right? I'm seeing the different words: diversity, inclusion, charity, respect, integrate, mission, community. I think that was one that was designed to show what like a healing community looks like, or being an anti-racist. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate your interpretation of that one too.
I think for me, it's the one in the lower right-hand corner on my side is redlining. And I that one popped up because I know people that have really experienced that in housing.
And we're going to talk about that too.
The one that jumps out at me, and maybe this is a comment on who I am, okay, but unacceptable. Out of any word, that one literally jumps off the screen.
Yep. All right. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, I thought this was interesting to look at all the different ways. There's so many words that tie into this one topic. It shows all the different areas that it touches. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about definitions. As you all know, I really like to focus on research and terms that can be defined, and education, true education. So I'm going to talk a little bit about systematic versus institutional racism. They depending on the system, they can be the same, but sometimes they're different. As we're evolving, they're becoming slightly different. But in some circumstances, they can be very, very similar, right? So our government is an institution. So just thinking about it that way. So the way I really like to think about things is, through what I call, especially complex matters like this, is through this kind of iceberg reference, right? So what we're looking at, there's a whole bunch of history down here in the bottom of the iceberg, right? Those are the structural forces at play that contribute to our patterns, our observable behaviors that you have up here at the top, right? And then you have your events over here that happen on the surface level that react. But there's all this going on at the bottom of that iceberg, which has created what's happening, and we're just kind of experiencing the top half. So there's a lot of systematic design, and there's a lot of things about original thoughts that this country had, which was put into systems and institutions that still govern the United States today. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how this structures impact systemic racism and the laws that actually enforce, right? Enforce systemic racism. So we're going to talk about this today, and then we're going to have a discussion at the end. All right. So the United States is governed by several types of laws and legislations. So I'm going to go through each one of these, and I'm going to have examples of each one of these. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how the two of diversity inclusion, all the things that makes it different, but unique and wonderful. And, but why, why is, and it should be unacceptable, but it's not because of the laws and the systems and the institutions that govern it. So let's start off with constitutional law. This is our law of the land. This is our U.S. Constitution. And I can tell you right now, it was founded in racism, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You also have statutory law. These are laws enacted by legislative bodies. So this is Congress, state, or local governing bodies. You also have administrative laws. These are rules, orders, decisions of federal, state, or government, and these are responsible for day-to-day enforcement, okay? So these are the things that also, police divisions use and things like that to do the work that they do in the communities. You have executive orders, also known as EOs. The government has wonderful abbreviations for a lot. Executive orders, you also hear them as EOs. These are directives issued by the President of the United States to manage the federal government and how they manage its constituents. And executive orders take place in many forms. There can be as simple as, hey, let's simplify the way that we collect taxes from our citizens. It can also go a complete opposite direction and exclude an entire group of people from entering our country. Okay. I'm going to share kind of another perspective on executive orders. Presidents also issue these when they feel like going through the congressional process is too difficult or they don't know it. And not trying to point fingers, but when you don't know it, an executive order is the easiest way to go. So that's the other thing. And I think former President Trump has set a precedence for this. So we are going to start to see a lot more executive orders, I think, come out of the White House. And, and then society and everything else will just kind of have to react. Regulations are rules made by federal, state administrative agency. Oops, sorry. I was trying to minimize the screen, which are part of executive branch of Congress. They're used to carry out the intent of laws passed by Congress. And then you have municipal ordinances, and these are really your local laws or governing bodies that apply to your local townships, cities, jurisdictions, counties, so on and so forth. Does this all make sense? I know it's a lot, but these will, you know what I mean? These will kind of give you an idea of the laws and legislations that happen all around us every day. So within these, you have 3 sets of laws, which I've talked about before. You have the federal level, you have your state level, and you have your local level. So going back to that trickle down effect, at the federal level, if the constitutional and statutory level, if that level is rooted in systematically oppressing a certain group of people, it will trickle down into all of these other types of laws and legislations. Yes, see hand up, go ahead.
Yeah, how does administrative law, when you don't have a governing body of elected officials, differ from regulations because it's the same group of structures? You've got federal, state, administrative agencies. What's the distinction there? I don't follow that.
Yeah, so sorry, say that again. The first part, my camera. So I got what you heard, and you were saying that the statutory law is made by Congress, and then the regulations are same. Sorry, say that again.
Right, but you drop down to the 3rd category, administrative law. How does that differ from regulations? Because there aren't elected people making administrative law, I didn't think.
So some do. So usually those are so it depends on what you're talking about elected. So there's a lot of appointees in positions of power that they actually do make decisions into law. So yeah, there's different trying to say this without getting too deep into the weeds. So you have your elected officials, which are like Congress. Excuse me. Those elected officials, but you also have another set of elected officials, which are appointees, and they are also responsible for lawmaking. They might not be the ones accountable, so they're not going to be the ones, signing the final bill, but they're going to be the draftees. They're going to be the experts who understand the laws in ways that they don't, and they are still in those rooms making those decisions
Okay.
in that manner. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Hi, Angela. It's John again, from New
Sure.
York City. I also want to add that in the case of like the category of laws and regulations that you can get rid of, I think the easiest ones are municipal ordinances. In my experience, a lot of them get voided by a court of law because they're found to be discriminatory or what you call void for vagueness. And sometimes they are created just to attack a certain group or a certain class. And here in New York State, I can tell you that quite a few of them have been voided for vagueness over the years. That's part of the work I do here, so I'm a little familiar with the courts and like the laws. So
Good.
yeah, I just want to say that, municipal ordinances are some of the easiest ones to get rid of once they're found to be unconstitutional. Thank you.
Good. No, and that's really good to hear, because some of these ones that I'll cover in the following slides, they have been, overridden or, deemed unconstitutional, or they've been revised or amended, right, depending on where they are in the law. Or legislation. So, that does happen. But again, we're talking about things over time, right? So going back, so just a quick reminder. So going back to our iceberg, right? We have a history and a precedent of these laws, which is what I'm going to kind of cover here. So I'll start off with constitutional law, just kind of really backing your point. So what I've done for the next few slides, just to kind of, show is these are constitutional laws that have been historically deemed by analysts as, as things that support systematic racism. So the Constitution has been amended and over time to rectify some of these injustices. For example, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and the 14th Amendment granted equal protection. However, our Constitution does state that, people of color, Black Americans, are 3/5 of a person. So, there's things like that that are really embedded into our constitutional law, which is the 3/5 compromise. So, these are constitutional laws, down to the article and the section that really supported where we are today. So talking about that trickle down effect, these are all clauses that were part of our Constitution at one point or another. That, again, part of the system. And so talking about federal, going down to our other areas of legislation through Congress, through our local, through our states, they're all using these as examples to create their own laws. So, fugitive slave clause, that was in here, requiring, freed, enslaved people who escaped a free state to be returned. Right, yeah, so, oops. I was like, not all states have these for dogs and animals, but we have them for human beings, which I think is always an interesting reference. I also want to bring up again, another thing, the Indian Commerce Clause, right? So not just focusing on one race, but there are other races that suffer at the hands of these laws as well. And we can't forget, people of native or Indian descent, because they have also suffered greatly within this nation due to the systems in place. Electoral college, now they are not explicitly racist, but they've been criticized heavily for participating in systematic racism. Right.
If
All
I
right.
can just add
Sure.
one thing, trying to change all this is so difficult, right? And it can be overwhelming and it can make us weary. But if you ever get weary, okay, just bring up the fraction of 3/5. and think that one of our, or many of our humans, okay, were classified as 2/5 less of somebody else. To me, that is the most motivating thing, and it's still in the Constitution because it can't be removed, okay?
Yep.
I mean, it can be rejected, but if we ever get tired and go, well, you know what, whatever, okay, I don't have the energy, go back to that and think that a whole classification of our humanity was dehumanized, really, okay, by 2/5, and that no matter what, we must change until that equity is seen and instituted with it just everywhere. I don't think there's anything more powerful than that I see, because it's there every day, you know. I mean, in our Constitution, in our founding, I mean, in the structure that is our foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one of the founding things of our country. And we see this. Really good point. All right, so this is a little bit more. So it's interesting, again, talking about that trickle down, really good catch on that, John. Trickle down effect. So these are statutory laws, right? So I went a little bit further back on this one, but I really wanted to capture the Indian Removal Act. They removed an entire group of people based on their race and culture, and it was forced. And the federal law was like, yeah, that's fine. We're going to do this. So this is the precedent of our laws, right? So I'm saying this because this is precedent. So, and we are in 2024. This is just under 200 years ago. That's maybe 3 generations. So again, it's far back as far as we're thinking, right? As far as our evolution of what we've experienced in life. But in the grand scheme of humanity, it is not that far back, right? The second one, Chinese Exclusion Act, right? We talked about inclusion. This is purposefully excluding them in 1882, okay? And then I heard, Miss Evelyn say Jim Crow laws. These lasted for over 150 years. 150 years. These are multiple generations. Right. I won't go into but we understand, everybody knows Jim Crow, right? Or that's one thing we were taught in history. Federal Housing Act. So going back to the redlining, people don't talk about this. This is not taught in our history books. 1934. We are not 100 years away from this yet. People who were born are still living. Who were affected by redlining, they're still living. Their ancestors are still alive. The people who built this act, they walk among, they're one descendant below, maybe 2, walk among us today. Right? So the anti-drug abuse. So, again, this is another topic of conversation. This really, focused on the war on drugs. Ended up becoming a war of people on color. They used this to target, people of Latin descent, which they assumed where all the drugs were coming from, and people of African-American descent who were using them. And then voter ID law, right? Remember, IDs are mandatory, but then that doesn't abide with your local laws. Not all laws require people to have an ID. So when that came out, that was also very discriminatory. And then you had to have a certain type of ID, and it had to be valid. And, there's all these little nuances. Right. Going into common case laws, right? So you're going into courts, your court system, which you're supposed to trust and supposed to give you justice, and you've been wronged, and you go into your court system, but because they follow the federal and the state and all these other laws and the Supreme Court, we can't forget them. That's that's case law as well, right? Trickles down here. So these are some we learned about Plessy and Ferguson. I know I did in my history books. Right? Again, we're within 150 years of this. So, okay, so then let's, again, Korematsu, Japanese. We see here again, there's more, versus United States. This is around World War II. We're still within 100 years of this one. This one is in my lifetime, McCluskey versus Kemp. And then let's talk about the ones that have happened within the past 10 years. So again, you can see, in all of these, cases, they're a little bit different, but same thread.
Yes, Angela, and I'll agree that each case, along with a few others not listed here, is like the textbook example of systematic racism, right? And over some time, I guess about 100 years, 50 or 60 with the Supreme Court included, they've managed to really stifle our rights. I just wanted to add some of the other cases that are not included here is like the doctrine of ending qualified immunity, and I had one other that I can't think of right now, but and most recently the court looks here to give presidential immunity to, I should say, every president. I won't name one like he did before, but these are the type of victories, quote unquote, that just produce and just exacerbate systemic racism.
Yeah. So yeah, you're going to lead us into our discussion, actually. So after reviewing all those types of laws, I want us to really take some time to talk about some of these discussion questions. So now that we've looked and really gone through, this is kind of really where I want us to focus on kind of these, 5 questions. So thinking about the systems that are in place, the systems, there's multiple, right? And so we can continue this conversation and go into many areas: education, healthcare, commerce, socioeconomics. And take it to the next level. Maybe we will in future conversations. But yeah, I think let's start talking about some of those topics now. How does it affect individuals and communities daily? How does it intersect with other forms of discrimination? I think policies and practices is a huge topic. And I'm actually glad we have a couple people that work in there. So maybe you can talk a little bit about it, about what's been done to, counteract that. I'd love to hear that. I know, that there's work being done, but it's difficult.
I don't want to be the only one stepping up. So I'll step back for a moment to just give somebody else a chance.
But we need your wisdom, though. We want to hear your wisdom and your experiences.
Jan, please keep on talking. I am really loving what you're saying.
Thank you all. I appreciate that. I guess like a model example of how racism affects individuals and communities. I just was in DC for the Johnson versus Grants Pass, Oregon litigation. It was the oral argument, and what the town of Grants Pass in Oregon is attempting to do is criminalize homelessness. So there are about, I'm not sure how many people viewed, I don't watch too much media, but I know there were a lot of media clips with the rallies that were out there. My organization, Vocal New York, was out there. And, this is a perfect example of systematic racism at its core, because you try to criminalize what a nonviolent act of sleeping on a sidewalk because you're housing insecure, and when you ask the folks that are representing Grants Pass, like, well, what would you do, say, if it becomes unconstitutional to sleep on a sidewalk? Where would you put these people? And the folks at Grants Pass said, well, we'll find them, and they'll, if they can't pay the fines, we'll jail them. The U.S. by far has the most people incarcerated on indigenous land. We have about 2.4 million people incarcerated. They're talking about adding another 2 million to that. We don't have the viable space to house 4 million people in prison industrial complexes. So a lot of these folks are going to be on the street, but then they're going to be on the street, but then they're going to be looking at paying fines and fees, right? Because there's no way they're going to house them. This is just what we call another revenue-based scheme, right? There's no way you're going to be able to house another 2 million people based on being homeless in these prison industrial complexes. There's just absolutely no room for it. So this is the role that these institutions, that these states, and this is an ordinance. This is why I was talking about ordinances before, right? So it's an ordinance. No state would actually criminalize homelessness on a macro level. No state would do that. So you rely on these trickle-down effects, and it trickles down to these towns, and what the state do will back the town, and then the town will initiate these punishment rules and ordinances. And I don't want to say too much about it, but I was passionate about it when I was down there, and you could tell that the narrative, the foundation is shifting under our feet. Where I don't think as far as even 10 years ago you think about criminalizing homelessness, and now it's like top of the agenda. So I'm not going to delve too much into the details. We don't have that much time, but I just wanted to give an example. Like I said, I thank you guys here for really listening, and I appreciate the comments. But yeah, I think that we're on a very slippery slope now. And when you can criminalize people for nonviolent actions like sleeping outside because you're housing insecure, then we're creating a diaspora where we're back to George Orwell's 1984, and it's really going to get worse before it gets better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think my response is, I think about the community that I live in, and just my educational background, also working with the Hispanic community. It says, how does systemic racism affect individual communities? And I think I'm seeing more and hearing more in terms of mental health not being addressed, because people are afraid to go to the doctor because they don't have the language necessarily. And just that if they're undocumented, that creates another concern. So I think it's a system that's been set up for people to be fearful and not have their needs met.
I think one of the worst parts of this, okay, it's right in the word, okay, systemic. It's in the system now. Okay, so there's the indoctrination that happens from whatever outside force that gets into a person that might not even be their beliefs, right? Okay, maybe at a young age or whatever, but now it's in the system. It's in our laws, and therefore it becomes part of our culture, and it becomes part of our everyday life, okay? So how does systemic racism affect individuals and communities on a daily basis? Daily, okay? And that's such an important thing because we need to eradicate it, okay? I mean, John was bringing up such an important point. And it's that if we see somebody that is on the street, okay, we should be thinking, how can we take care of them? Not to just support them, okay, but to get them to where they are at a level of comfort and safety. That's a human thing, okay? And I don't know how we can then say no, and then how we can say no because what? They look different, the color of their skin is different, therefore we'll take care of these people. It should be that, there's the old Ayn Rand thing where she said, and it's ignorant, that you make yourself happy and everybody does that, everybody will be happy. But there's all these people that can't make themselves happy because they need our help. And this is one of them. If you're on the street, you need our help, and we should be there. Okay. And I mean, I would much rather give our money, okay, from the taxation, not to a country so they can have $18 billion worth of weapons, but so that $18 billion can build a whole heck of a lot of buildings that can house people to help them, by the way, get back into the quote unquote system.
I think one of the first of all, Angela, I have to say thank you for talking specifics about the different kinds of laws, because I think probably everybody on this call, I mean, it's not a hard sell to say we have systemic racism. It's like, duh. I mean, of course it's there. But when you start talking about the laws and then posing the questions, how does this affect everybody on a daily basis? I think one of the issues too, then, with the laws that are in place, it makes it really easy for people to quote unquote legitimize othering people, and to not, there may have been an opportunity at one time for learning and education, but when our society is in such a place where it's where Trump normalized hate and othering, and states are now following suit in passing their own legislation in basically legitimizing discrimination, that then people just step away. It's easy for them to step away and say, well, it's the law, it's this. Instead of saying, no, that's not right. I mean, yeah, it might be the law, but it shouldn't be. And this is what we need to do to change it. It was really interesting. And I'll just add to that in terms of like a daily basis. So we live in Phoenix. There are 26, 22 or 26 reservations within the state of Arizona. The Navajo Nation takes up a good portion of the northern part of our state. And we had visitors this spring who had never, seen a reservation and had no idea the level of poverty that exists. I mean, it is like something that you would see in developing countries. And there are lawsuits today going on about water rights from indigenous people, trying to take away their water. I mean, during COVID, the Navajo Nation was one of the hardest hit areas in the country with all this. And it's not until people like the people that came to visit, better, or you do better when you know better, and I think that these kinds of things do need to be out there in the open, and we all need to be squirming with them instead of easily just saying, oh, well, that's not true, that's fake news, or whatever it might be. Okay, I'll shut up now.
That's great. Maya has her hand raised again.
Melissa, you've got me thinking about gatekeeping, and in your discussion of the lack of resources of Indigenous people. And then I think about all of the missing and murdered women, and how from beginning to end, there's very few advocates, right? We're seeing them now. We're seeing them in podcasts or, in the true crime influx. But, when we think about what happens when someone goes missing, well, first, someone has to care. And then someone with some sort of power actually has to do something about it. So if you're living on a reservation and the nearest, you have, there's different, policing that happens on reservations, but generally it's a small group of officers. And then if that person is, maybe considered missing outside of tribal land, well, how many police officers are then in that county? And how many of those police officers actually care about Indigenous people enough to investigate? And do they have the resources? So there's a gatekeeping of care, there's a gatekeeping of resources, there's a gatekeep. So even just in that example, right, there's so many areas where we can fail others by simply just not caring about them. Add in racism, and then nothing will ever get done. Because I was thinking about, in my world, in talent acquisition, there are also so many levels of gatekeeping. And when I first started looking for a job, when I moved to Chicago, I found myself removing my first name and just putting my first initial, because I knew that people reviewing resumes were making assumptions about me as a person without knowing anything about me. And then I took a step back and I said, well, you're using your white privilege to pass over that first gate. And I stopped doing that. But when I got into my position in talent acquisition, I knew that I was removing that barrier for a lot of people who might be getting passed over because of a name on their resume, or because of where I could see that they were coming from as far as geographically. But I'm only one person. I'm only one gate on, that track that person is having to traverse hurdles over and over again. So it's just like, even in the smallest area of our lives, there are gatekeepers. So that's all I have to say about that.
All right, so we've talked over a few of these topics. How it intersects with other forms of discrimination, rules, institution. You just talked about that. How institutions do that regularly. They'll judge you based on your name. And we've talked a bit about how it affects representation in media. But politics. So the other thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to go back to this, and we did talk about it, so I really appreciate it. Starts with the people. So, right, when we're talking about these laws and legislations, these are people creating these. They're not made by AI, not yet, right? But right now, there's people creating that. But even in AI, not to go down that wormhole, but you still have people creating the AI. So can be inherent bias in there as well. That's a whole other topic. We can talk about that at a future date, as that's one of the areas I'm researching as well. But yeah, these are all people that create it, right? So going back to people have to care. What do the people who are in power, what do they care about? I feel like as people who serve in Congress, we have to care about these things, because at their level, I'm not sure, I'm not sure they do. They may say they do, but then it doesn't show. We still have a whole systematic, structure, but we're not sure if our elected officials care. Yep, go ahead.
I think that these people in power, what they're interested in is staying in power and doing whatever it takes to stay in power. I'm in the process of reading the Liz Cheney memoir. And that's exactly what happened. It's like, you know, there's a section in the book that talks about people knew that what had happened on January 6th was totally wrong, but they couldn't risk being voted out by their constituents in the next election. And so I think it comes down to power and money. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think along those same lines too, I think we have to look at the construction of our nation. How was it organized? You know, and then we see, like in Florida and other states, where there seems to be a determined annihilation of slavery. And so when you hear about what's going on today with the rejection that January 6th did not happen, or the reason why it happened and it's okay, it aligns with the structure of our nation. And it's all about power. It's all about control. It's all about me staying where I need to stay and making sure that you are left completely out. That's the way I understand it. You know, it's all historical. It's all in history. And I think we have a tendency sometimes to be surprised by what happens today because we don't know enough about what happened yesterday and years past. It's all connected. There is absolutely no disconnect. So, yeah.
That's really true. But, you know, it's so interesting. We have the power. Okay. I mean, I know that many, you know, leaders have said that. Okay. But we do. Okay. And our power is in unity. But if we buy into the same us against them that is being promoted every day in so many areas, then we're not going to get anywhere. Okay. Because that's going to be the structure of our existence. And so if I can just throw out a couple of ideas, you know, one I said before, our identity should be as human. And that means that every one of us here, okay, it doesn't matter what our politics, our gender, whatever, okay, we can unite. And so we go from us against them to us against harm, okay, which I said before, okay. But then what we do is that we unite under that. And we go after those specific things that really move our heart, right? We're not going to get involved in everything because we can't. But the unity, I mean, of 8 billion strong or 300 million or whatever is here in the United States, we have the ability, because if we unite at a level where it's not us against them, okay, it's not black versus white, it is not, you know, gay or straight or Christian, Muslim, okay, that's all of our diversity. That has to be recognized as level 2, right? Okay. And I think that it's really important that that's our point. So we have to organize, and then it's against harm. Everything. Okay. I mean, anything that's going on anywhere. And we have numbers. And just like Angela said, it's two things. Okay. They care about being elected again. Guess what? That's our power, right? We have the vote, especially if we unite to go, by the way, no chance. Okay. And then the second is money. And I want to give just one example, and I'm not being political here. If you take a look at Rudy Giuliani now, okay, he used to be in the news all the time. But when you get, I think it's even billions of dollars in the lawsuits, I don't know. Okay. But he hasn't said a thing because it's money. Okay. And we have to realize how to use that in the right way as an asset, not as a weapon, but to use everything that we can that's not harmful so that we can start eliminating what is just a bunch of really fallacies. Because again, like I said, you know, take a look at everybody that's on the screen here. Now close your eyes and listen to them, and then tell me what color their skin is, even, you know, how old they are or whatever. Okay. That's the approach we have to take. But, you know, there's one more aspect to it. When we unite, then we use truth and we raise awareness with the power of truth. That's the road ahead. How do we do that? I don't know, except that I think we start with our identity and then we spread that and live that. I guess. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're on track to really uncovering the facts and uncovering the truth today, just with you guys being in discussion. And I just want to just like share a little bit about what you were talking about, how we kind of like dismantle the system that we're confronted with. And I think, Angela started out today sharing with us definitions of vocabulary. And I think we have to start dismantling the vocabularies that are alive and well in our minds. And one of those words for Black and brown communities, and maybe others too, is marginalized. And I think when we use the word marginalized, it's indicative of no power. We have to stop using that word because we are a powerful people. And what you're talking about, Seth, is that united, we are people. United, we're people. We don't have to talk about marginalized or colors or whatever. We're talking about humanity. So I think we have to start focusing more on that way. And the message, how do we get it out? One event like this at a time. We're all from different areas. Let's spread the news. It's slow moving, but we have to start somewhere.
Okay, for all the people that I haven't, that I haven't, that I haven't annoyed, okay, now you're really going to get annoyed. Okay, so let's come up with how we do it. Okay, let's not leave here without some ideas, and then let's get together again and perfect that. Okay, that movement from talk to action is what has to happen now. Okay, or else it's going to stay the same. Okay, and the thing is that that's unacceptable because we're seeing how deep people can take us to those murky depths. You know what I mean? That's what's happening today. And we can't allow that. So let's discuss how we can do it and what we're going to do.
Before
And
we get into that angle, I'd like to have hear from Angela to see what she might have something on her in her remarks today as the keynote, and let's see what, and then we can discuss your idea. But I want to go back to Angela right now because we're almost out of time. Actually, we're 2 minutes over time. And then if you guys want to hang around, we can talk more about it. But I want to give respect to her as our keynote today.
Well, I was going to say, actually, I feel like that's its own topic of conversation, because if we're talking about what can we do to fix it? I mean, I think, oh my gosh, I think there's a lot of solutions. We just have to kind of take multi-directional approaches. So it's like, one, we have to start with the system that's in place, right? We have to, without dismantling the whole United States and taking the whole thing down, right, and trying to rebuild it from scratch, because that's its own beast. So one of the things we've talked about, actually a little bit at work, is how do we? Because I work in strategy, right? So just to give you all an idea about strategy, it's the way I think, it's the way my brain works, and it helps really a lot with work. So what I do is we help organizations make a plan and achieve those goals. So, so thinking about it in those terms, I think the United States needs to have like a strategic objective or a goal to really work on this and be united around this, kind of to our point, and that will help really drive everything else. And that, I think that's one of the issues that we have as a nation, is we don't know where we're going anymore. So a lot of you know or may not know, I do travel a lot as well. I go to other nations, other countries. I see where they are and their evolution. I do a lot of that, do a lot of research as well. And I'm seeing the direction for other countries of where they want to go and who they want to be as a nation. And I don't think America has that right now. So I think that would be a major solution to help us move the needle to move forward.